Hello everyone, this is the second entry in this DevLog series for my game Gradient. I want to start off by thanking everyone who watched the first video. It gave me so much motivation hearing from you all, and for anyone new, the goal for this series is to provide regular updates on the development of my game Gradient, as well as a way to grow a community for the game and my other work. In this episode, I want to briefly touch on my vision for the general game design, show you a deeper look into two of Hugh's movesets, and explain more specifically what that means. Gradient will have a large focus on its story, and I've been working with a writer since the game's inception who's already set the groundwork for the world and who Hugh is. We'll have more news on the story in the next videos. My vision for the final game is to have 4 unique, interconnected, open areas where the player will explore, solve puzzles, fight enemies, and unlock new abilities. You'll be able to explore each area from the start of the game, but certain areas will be inaccessible until you've unlocked the necessary abilities. These movesets are currently represented in the game by Hugh's model changing color: red, green, blue, and yellow. In this video, I want to go into more detail on both the red and green movement and powers. Starting with the red abilities, Hugh has a glide jump, a dash, an automatic fire when aiming from the hip, a semi-automatic fire when aiming down sights, and grenades for crowd control. If Hugh is on the ground when the jump button is pressed, he simply jumps. Once Hugh is in the air and the jump button is pressed again, Hugh begins to glide for a max of 2 seconds. While gliding, if the jump button is pressed again, the glide is cancelled, and the current glide time is temporarily stored, so if Hugh tries to glide again, he can once, but doesn't get as much height. The total glide time still can only add up to 2 seconds. This allows Hugh to correct a jump if he's just going to barely miss it, but Hugh doesn't get as much height on that second try. Once Hugh lands back on the ground, all the values are reset so he can do it all over again. For the dash, when the button is pressed, whatever direction Hugh is looking at in that moment, his velocity is increased in that same direction. This allows Hugh to have a great deal of maneuverability. He can dash straight up, dash straight towards the ground, or behind cover depending on the situation. The only limitation is he can dash only once every time leaving the ground. For attacking, there are 2 main ways games implement ranged weapons. One way is called a hit scan. I think of hit scan weapons kind of like a laser pointer. The instant the player attacks, a ray is cast, and if that ray collides with a damageable object, the damage is applied immediately. Another way is projectile-based weapons, meaning an object is spawned from the player's location and that projectile travels through the game world over time, and damage is only applied if it makes contact with an enemy. There are advantages and disadvantages to both methods. I've chosen to go with projectile weapons in Gradient because 1, I just like seeing the projectiles traveling through space, and secondly, Gradient is a single-player experience, and while performance is a priority, there is no concern for server load since all calculations will be performed locally. Hugh has a blaster on each hand and has different attack options based on whether he's hip firing or aiming down sights. For all the projectile attacks, the basics are the same. First, a line trace is cast straight out of the camera. A line trace is basically a hit scan but doesn't apply damage. The line trace is just like a laser pointer shot straight out of the camera, and you can see it here on screen represented as that green line. Wherever the trace hits, the location can be returned as a coordinate in space. So, without boring you too much, we do some math to spawn a projectile at Hugh's hand that travels to the exact location the trace hit. If Hugh is aiming down sights, he will only fire once per button press, but if hip firing, his blaster fires like an automatic weapon. I wanted to prevent Hugh from just standing in one place, blasting away, so the longer the fire button is held, the less accurate the projectile becomes. This is done by generating a circle where the projectiles can hit. At the start of the attack, the circle is very small, so the projectile hits exactly in the center of the reticle, but the longer the button is held down, the larger the circle gets and the less accurate the projectile becomes. Hugh also has the ability to throw grenades. I wanted to be able to see where the grenade was going to land, so Hugh has a better chance of hitting his targets. I also felt it was important to have the grenades affected by gravity. points are generated in space, predicting the trajectory of an object with a given velocity. You can see those points on screen here as those floating green spheres. I then attach a mesh to those points so you can see the trajectory on screen. Once the AoE button is released, a grenade is spawned with the same velocity used to predict the projectile's path, and the grenade time delay begins. The grenade uses another one of Unreal's built-in functions called Apply Radial Damage, and this function applies damage to enemies within a set radius, and the damage applied is directly linked to how close the enemy was to the center of the radius at that moment. Each color will have a super ability, but I want to save those for later. Red's abilities are set up to be most effective at mid-range. Red has good movement both vertically and horizontally to push into enemies or get to a better vantage when needed. For the green abilities, Hue has a vertical blink jump, a teleport, a birdshot style shotgun when aiming from the hip, a slow-moving but very hard-hitting slug shot when aiming down sights, and a damage pool AoE attack. Taking Hue's green abilities one by one, to blink when the jump button is pressed, there's a quick check to make sure Hue doesn't teleport inside of an object above him, and if there is an object above him, he blinks just high enough to not get stuck in that object. To teleport, a particle system is used to provide feedback as to where Hue will teleport to, and when the button is released, Hue teleports just slightly higher than where indicated to allow Hue to end just on top of a ledge if he's aiming just at the corner of a wall, or just on top of a platform if he's looking at it from underneath. For the shotgun attack, when triggered, 20 line traces are cast each with a unique location within a circle to get a spread like expected from a shotgun. And we do the same math as before to ensure the projectiles start at his hand and end in the correct unique locations. When aiming down sights, Hue fires a slug shot that is very slow moving, so Hue has to be in very close range to be able to hit his targets consistently. For Hue's area of effect attack, he spawns a damage pool. The damage pool contains a collision sphere that has no visibility or collision with Hue, but detects what objects are within the sphere. We can run a command in Unreal to show the collision sphere, but it's just for development. The collision sphere checks the objects inside its perimeter, and if it is an enemy, we apply damage as long as the enemy is within the perimeter. As you can already see, Hue's green abilities are all focused on getting up close to dispatch enemies, so Hue can teleport in close, get in a few shots, and get out before they even knew he was there. Each color allows for a unique playstyle and will allow for more variety in gameplay. I'm excited to share the other two colors, blue and yellow, in the upcoming videos. And I also think it would be fun to hear your predictions for what you think the abilities could be for the remaining two. So leave a comment if you have any guesses. I want to thank everyone who's made it here to the end, and be sure to like and subscribe if you like this content.